June prices fell, first time in 6 years. That's not a rounding error. That's a historic print. And the new Fed chair walked into Congress the same week and said, no tolerance for persistently elevated inflation. Those two things can't both be true at the same time, and yet they are. That contradiction is going to drive your next trades, whether you understand it or not. By the end of this video, you'll know why a deflationary CPI print didn't move the Fed chair an inch, what Warsh's 5 internal task forces actually signal about how he makes decisions, and the 3 specific signals to watch in every Warsh statement that'll tell you where rates are headed before the press conference ends. If you skip this and keep reading Warsh the old way, scanning for rate language and mapping it onto the Powell framework, you'll buy the wrong dips, fade the wrong rallies, and wonder why your macro read keeps getting flushed. June CPI came in negative. Prices actually fell on a month-over-month basis. That hasn't happened in 6 years. If you've been in the markets for any length of time, your brain fires a specific sequence when you see that number. Deflationary print, Fed pivots, risk on, buy it. That's the playbook, and it worked for most of the last decade. Every other time prices fell sharply, the Fed pivoted within 2 meetings. That was the trade. That was the rule. Markets aren't ripping. Warsh walked into his first congressional testimony and said, no tolerance for persistently elevated inflation. Here's the number that explains why. Core CPI is still plus 2.6% year over year. One monthly dip doesn't change an annual trend. Warsh isn't watching the month-over-month print. He's watching where we've been for 3 years. And the Fed funds rate? Still sitting at 3.5 to 3.75, exactly where it was. The old playbook, one good print equals pivot equals rally, it's dead with this Fed chair. Warsh is playing a different game entirely. Every other time prices fell sharply, you knew the rule. That rule doesn't apply here. And until you understand what game Warsh is actually playing, you'll keep misreading every statement he puts out. What kind of Fed chair walks into his first congressional testimony and announces 5 internal review committees instead of a rate signal? That answer tells you everything about how this Fed is going to move. Warsh's first move as Fed chair wasn't a rate signal. It was 5 committees, 5 internal task forces, reviewing Fed operations from the ground up. Communications, balance sheet policy, data collection, productivity and technology impacts, and inflation frameworks. That's not a routine Fed announcement. That's an autopsy. He's not saying Powell got the timing wrong. He's saying the whole diagnostic process was broken. Every single item on that list is something that Powell's Fed got publicly destroyed for. Markets called the Fed's communication confusing, inconsistent. Congress agreed. Critics hammered the balance sheet rundown for moving too slowly. Its models missed the 2021 inflation surge entirely. The average inflation targeting framework just disappeared. No announcement, no explanation. Warsh didn't just inherit a Fed. He inherited an institution that lost credibility with markets, with Congress, and with itself. And here's what that means for you. One good CPI print can't move a Fed chair who hasn't decided whether he trusts the CPI methodology. If Warsh believes the data collection process is broken, then the data, even the data that says prices fell, doesn't tell him what he needs to know. He's not ignoring the print. He's not sure the print means what it says. Warsh is rebuilding institutional credibility before he rebuilds the rate path. That's the sequence. Credibility first, cuts second. One good print can't undo a credibility problem that took 3 years to build. The task forces aren't bureaucratic theater. They're the actual prerequisite to a rate move. When those task forces start reporting conclusions, that's when you start pricing in a pivot, not before. And there's one more wild card in this picture. It's large enough to show up in the macro data, and Warsh openly admitted the Fed doesn't know what to do with it. Business investment is up roughly 25% year over year through Q1 2026. That's not a small number. AI data center construction and high-tech equipment are driving almost all of it. This is large enough to move the macro data the Fed uses to set rates. Warsh can't ignore it, but he can't categorize it either. Warsh acknowledged deep uncertainty about whether that spending translates into real economic benefit. And that uncertainty runs in 2 completely opposite directions. If AI is genuinely productivity enhancing, it's deflationary over time. Real output goes up, unit costs come down, and the Fed has room to ease. That's the bull case for rate cuts. That's the scenario traders want. But if this investment spending is a bubble, if the investment doesn't produce output to justify it, you get stagflation. Massive demand for energy, for construction, for high-end equipment. Wages get bid up in those sectors. You get none of the productivity payoff on the other side. That's higher for longer, much higher, for much longer. Warsh's actual line was, AI investment will eventually just be called investment. That's not a compliment. He's saying the market is treating AI investment as a special, guaranteed return category, and he doesn't see it that way. He's skeptical. And here's the twist. That skepticism is actually the most bullish thing he said all testimony. If the AI story eventually proves out, Warsh has room to cut aggressively, but he won't move until the story proves out or collapses. If AI is being misclassified in these models the Fed uses, every rate projection built on current investment data is mispriced. Warsh won't cut until the AI thesis resolves, and right now, it's done neither. That's a hard constraint on the next rate move. So given all of that, a Fed chair who doesn't fully trust his own data, running 5 task forces, staring at a 25% AI investment surge he can't categorize, how do you actually read what this Fed does next? There's a 3-signal framework that gives you that read before the market gets there. Most investors are going to keep reading Warsh wrong. They'll scan the statement for rate language, patient, data-dependent, appropriate, and try to map it onto the Powell framework. That won't work. Warsh isn't Powell, and now you know why. Here's the actual lens. 3 signals, every Warsh statement, every testimony, every press conference. There are only 3 things that matter. Signal 1, task force progress language. When Warsh starts reporting concrete findings or conclusions from those 5 task forces, that's the credibility rebuild milestone. That means that he's decided to trust the framework enough to act. Before you see that language, don't expect cuts. It doesn't matter what the CPI does. Signal 2, the AI productivity framing. Right now, Warsh is deeply uncertain. The moment that framing shifts, that shift tells you the next rate move, either towards confirmation that AI is driving real productivity gains, or towards explicit concern that it's a bubble. Productivity confirmation means cuts are closer. Bubble language means higher for longer. Watch for the shift, not for the current position. Signal 3, the word persistently. Warsh said no tolerance for persistently elevated inflation. That word is doing a lot of work. Persistent means he still thinks the threat is structural, not temporary, not fading, structural. The day that word disappears or gets softened to just elevated without persistent in front of it, that's the pivot signal. That's the day the market reprices. And you want to be positioned before that happens, not after. You now have the lens, credibility rebuild language, AI framing, and the word persistently. Those 3 signals decode this Fed chair before the market prices him in. And that answers the question I opened with. Why is Warsh still hawkish even though prices fell for the first time in 6 years? Because a single deflationary print can't solve a credibility problem that took 3 years to build. He's not responding to the data. He's waiting until he can trust it. The 3 signals tell you when that threshold gets crossed. You now know exactly what to watch inside of every Warsh Fed statement. The task force language, the AI productivity framing, and whether the word persistently disappears from his inflation commentary. This is a powerful read on where policy is going. And the more compelling a macro framework becomes, the more dangerous it is to act on it without knowing what price is actually doing. Knowing what Warsh is signaling is not the same as knowing whether price is confirming this signal right now. Here's what knowing those 3 signals also doesn't give you: the truth about the direction of price. It gives you a narrative, and narratives matter. But price is what tells you whether the narrative is true or not. The measured move is a framework for understanding the direction of price. It tells you whether this policy shift is being confirmed by price or not. If you act on this without that framework, you could be on the wrong side of a trade for days, weeks, or even months until price confirms it. That framework is what I teach. The traders in my community don't trade a Fed policy shift. They know what price has to do to change the trend. And until it does, they may be trading in the direct opposite direction of consensus, regardless of what that policy shift suggests. They wait for the setup. They have a process for knowing when it's valid. That's the process I teach every day at eminiaddict.com.